Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Dan Caruso. I am the chair of the Democratic City Committee. However, I had nothing to do with most of this. This is our Peace Subcommittee Chair, Barbara Fenby. We work also at standing outside quite a bit. I've joined you on a hand, and we've done this for how many months now, Barbara, outside? Years worth of demonstrations outside. Mostly we get pretty good response, but I'll let her go on with that. That's her bailiwick. But I just want to introduce Barbara. Thank you again for being here. I see some familiar faces from out of town, which is good to see as well. And then, Barbara, take over.
I'd like to thank all of you for showing up. You're a very elect and select group. This is being put on by the Peace Subcommittee. You probably have seen us standing out with our signs. Many of you were there, Chris and Donna and Barb and so on. No? You folks, yeah. And we have been trying to figure out what next. You also see me standing in here with a shirt, and it says Peace for Ada. And I'm doing that because my friend and peace activist, Ada Hatalin, was murdered on July 28th of this year. And he lived in the West Bank where I met him. He was a Bedouin. If you've seen No Other Land, the movie, the Bedouin villages, Madafar Yara, that's where he lived. And he was a 31-year-old strong peace activist, soccer player, and writer, and college-educated English teacher, articulate, very bright, and always welcoming, and the father of 3 boys, now 6, 4, and 2. All he wanted was peace for his sons and for his family, just as I want peace for my 5 great-grandsons and for my family, just as you want peace for your family. And so the question is, how do we get there? And so the reason we are meeting tonight is to say, we've been standing out with signs for a year. We've gone from outright hostility to peace signs, which is progress. But what next? Is there a next step? So I've invited Dr. Joshua Schneider from BC, who has studied reconciliation and peace in Guatemala, and Julia Falco, who is majoring in that, and our Jamie, who we all know blows in at the last minute, to speak about peace and what we might do next. So I'll turn it over to you. The drill is, if you could hold your questions, and at the end we'll have like 20 minutes or so to noodle as a group about the questions you might have and what it is that we might do next. So turn it to you, Josh.
Awesome, thank you.
There you go, that's yours.
Gotta have a hot mic. I think everyone, you can hear me, correct? Beautiful, beautiful. First, thank you so much for having me here this evening. It's a pleasure to talk with all of you about peace, peace building, active nonviolent resistance, and strategies for breaking cycles of violence. As Babs mentioned, I've done peace building work in Guatemala, also in El Salvador. I've taught courses in South Africa. Julia was on one of those courses in South Africa, as well as peace building in the Balkans, particularly from a Croatian perspective. So tonight, what I thought I would do is kind of give some theoretical ideas about peace building, active nonviolence, and strategies. But I'm very happy to talk concretely during the Q&A about what has worked in particular locations. I do believe a place-based contextual approach is important. There's really no one-size-fits-all approach to building peace. So, I'll use my 15 minutes, hopefully wisely, in trying to hit some of the ideas that we might want to further have a conversation on, and then look at practical strategies. So if that sounds good to you, I'm going to keep on going. So the first thing I think that's important is to kind of distinguish between negative peace and positive peace. And what we mean by that, when we think of negative peace, this is typically what you assume the absence of conflict, which in and of itself is a great thing, but it's not the fullness of peace when we really talk about peace in a much more robust way. But I would say always the absence of conflict is a very good first step for breaking cycles of violence. But when we're really thinking about positive peace or this robust vision of peace, it's much more comprehensive, right? It requires the rebuilding of interpersonal relationships, social relationships. It involves rebuilding human infrastructure as well as just political, social, and economic structures. So really, that's kind of the comprehensive piece that hopefully, we can try to work for in our respective areas of participation. So in order to work towards this more robust vision of positive peace, I think one of the important things to consider is the distinct ways in which human beings experience injustice or experience violence, right? You might be familiar with sort of the three main structures of violence. There's direct violence, often thought about interpersonally, so that usually results in direct harm. We could talk about structural violence, which is harm caused by social structures, unequal access to resources and opportunities. And we could talk about cultural violence, which is the way in which cultural norms, beliefs, and ideas can sustain that direct violence and structural violence. So I think that's important for thinking about, because then if we're going to try to promote this more robust vision of peace, we have to think about ways in which human beings experience injustice and then how to respond to those different levels. And, just to begin to think about some of the practices that might be important to this robust vision of peace would be building just social institutions where everyone has the opportunity to participate. Acknowledge wrongdoing, whether that be immediate wrongdoing or historical wrongdoing. Looking to repair the harm that has occurred in the past. Really promoting accountability. The focus of public apologies and forgiveness, I think, are also avenues of exploration for really trying to develop a more robust vision of peace. So with that being said, my own work as a peace builder, I think about it as being active in all facets of conflict cycles, right? So we can think about peace building prior to conflict ever erupting. When, hostilities are beginning to emerge, when there's conflict. And also, let me put a little asterisk. Sometimes conflict is very productive. Conflict can lead to new creative ways of being in the world. So conflict's not always the problem. I think the problem is when conflict becomes violent, right? And at the source of that violence is a sense of dehumanization of others. So when we're thinking about peace building, we can think about it before conflict ever really erupts into one of those three forms of violence. While conflict is erupted into violence, what do we do when we're in a situation of violence? So for example, if we look around the world in the various conflict zones, how can we build peace given that current context? As well as how do you begin to try to de-escalate harm and violence that's happening with the hope that ultimately we'll get to that first negative peace and then that more robust vision of peace. So those are some of the ideas of thinking about in terms of peace building. Now, as I mentioned in my little intro comment, I think essential to building peace is disrupting the cycle of violence. And from my perspective, and this doesn't have to be universally accepted or embraced, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on it. I think nonviolence is an essential approach to disrupting the cycle of violence. That when we're building peace, nonviolence isn't simply a strategy, but it's a form of resistance to injustice that's actually our way of life. Do we exist in the world in a nonviolent way? And that can be very difficult, right? And I'm happy to talk more concretely about that. But one thing that's often brought up when I mention this idea of nonviolence, it doesn't work. Everyone's like, no, nonviolence won't work. The reality is, if you look at empirical studies, particularly the work of Erica Chenoweth, she wrote a book called Why Civil Resistance Works. And she actually looks at over 1,000 forms of nonviolent resistance over the 20th century. And when nonviolent resistance is used in opposition to military force or the use of direct violence, the outcomes are 10 times better. So even if you're successful using military force to bring a conflict to an end, over 50% of the time, the cycle of violence will re-erupt within 5 years, whether in the form of a civil war or an authoritarian regime that will emerge. So I think it's important to really reflect on nonviolence, not as this like, oh, that was, a lovely idea to have, but actually a real strategy for thinking about how you can live in the world in a nonviolent way to break cycles of violence. So, what are ways in which we can live in the world nonviolently? As Babs mentioned, I work at Boston College, and we're currently putting on a series of workshops to develop nonviolent skills, right? So I think like anything, if you think of the amount of military training our military has, right? In order for the military to be elite, they need to be trained and they need to have certain dispositions and practices that make them effective. Well, if we're going to promote nonviolence, we need the exact same thing, but in a very different way. How do you build the skills, the habits, the strategies to actually engage in nonviolence in a productive way? So over the last year, we began this past, February, of beginning to do the nonviolent workshops at Boston College. The first one we did was on nonviolent communication as a strategy of just, dealing with interpersonal relationships, social relationships, work relationships, and then keep going up the political ladder of why nonviolent communication would be effective. I know, Julia, you might talk a little bit more about NVC, so I won't get too much into that. This past weekend, we had 30 students who were involved in an active bystander intervention and de-escalation training. And the goal of that is, how can you enter into a situation where you see conflict beginning to escalate to perhaps a point of violence? What are the skills you need to de-escalate that situation? So, take, for example, if you were riding on the T and someone with mental health issues were to confront you in a very loud and aggressive way, how would you try to de-escalate that situation in a way that's respectful of that person's human dignity and also doesn't necessarily lead to calling the police and violent constraint of that individual? So we were beginning to think about creative ways of building skills to become, nonviolent practitioners. So one of the ideas that we talked a little bit about, one of the trainers we had, Eli McCarthy, who's at Georgetown University, is part of the DC Peace Team. So creating community peace teams that are actually involved in training the local community and being involved. So Babs, you mentioned at the beginning of the talk that you guys are actively involved in demonstrations. That's one form of raising consciousness towards issues of peace. What might be some other ways, and how could you create a coalition to perhaps build a peace team? What that could look like. So we could think maybe creatively a little bit more in the Q&A about that. So those were some of the background things. Happy to talk also a little bit about the importance of educating for peace. The UN has their platform, EFP, Education for Peace, which is part of their creating a culture of peace. And they have 12 pillars of activities, again, that are aimed at building up the capabilities of a community to become more peaceful. And I'd say at the heart of that is the fundamental recognition of human dignity. So that every human being, regardless of their actions, has a value and worth, and ought to be addressed in a way that's commensurate with that value and worth. So how do we educate in a way that's educating for human dignity? So learning about what it means for human beings to have dignity, through human dignity, which is direct encounters with the other, right? So building networks of solidarity, creating a culture of encounter. And then lastly, so we have about, through, and with human dignity. That our actions should be commensurate with human dignity. And that goes back, at least from my perspective, to really highlighting nonviolence as a primary way of addressing the human dignity of another. So I'm going to hit on one other thing. Do I still have a minute? Okay, cool. So one of the things when Babs and I were chatting was, how do we move from thinking about values to action, right? And I think this is a really important question. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the idea of strategic planning. How do you actually develop an effective peace program that can lead to concrete results. So part of that, and I'd say the first part, is a strategic vision. So sitting around like we're doing tonight, gaining information, what do we want to accomplish? So do we have a strategic vision? And are we able to frame that in a way so the language of so anyone who's involved with community organization, you talk about collective action framing, right? How do we frame our vision in a way that is actionable? So trying to figure out who is responsible for whatever we want to change, what can we actually ask of that group that's measurable, and how can we leverage our social capital, whether that's through collaboration with other groups, to actually set off a series of actions that'll get us there. So you can use, sort of thinking about campaign objectives, the acronym SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So if you're thinking about this idea of what are our next steps in the strategic vision, what is specific, what's measurable, what's achievable, what's relevant, and what's time-bound. So as you envision that, then you want to make sure that whoever you're trying to engage actually has the potential to address the questions that you really want to see addressed in an actionable way. So, for example, if a student at Boston College were to come to me and say, Professor Snyder, I want BC to divest from any investments in X, Y, and Z, I'm like, great idea. I have absolutely no responsibility for the investments at Boston College, right? So there's kind of a failure. I mean, it's a great idea, but it's a failure to engage someone in a strategic vision who can actually make that come about. Really, even our president wouldn't be the person. You would need to get the board of trustees together. So kind of in thinking about moving from values to action, make sure that your interlocutor has the capability to achieve or actualize what you're looking for. The other key component, I would say, is coalition forming. So in any social movement, the more people involved, the better, right? So the importance of developing strategic coalitions, which, you don't have to agree on everything. But, let's say you want to take a stand on bringing the Russo-Ukrainian war to an end. There are lots of other groups and organizations that might be like, yes, we really are committed to bringing the Russo-Ukrainian conflict to an end. How do we work together as a coalition? What are the overlaps of our frames that we could actually see that overlapping, that intersection, and work together? And sort of set the other things aside, right? Because if you get into, well, we don't buy this, we don't buy that, you're not going to be able to necessarily have that same strategic overlap of, coalition goals. Again, coalitions, they're short term, but there are ways to maximize the efforts that you're trying to get across. Any other things I wanted to initially highlight? I would say the other key element of trying to move from values to action would be to think about what gives you hope. And I know this is a really hard one, right? When we look around the world and we see that the world is not going the way we want, I think hope is essential if you want to be an active peace builder. Where are those moments of incremental progress? Babs, you mentioned from maybe getting the one-fingered hello to the peace sign, yeah. Right? That's a vision of hope. You've moved at least some people on the continuum to go from hostility towards, no, this is an organization that's promoting peace. So really having hope, I think, is essential. Now, what do I mean by hope? I don't mean this naive optimism that everything's going to be okay if we just sit around and hold hands, because that's not realistic. Active hope is striving. It's realizing that there's incremental potential for progress, even though there's going to be setbacks. Likewise, it's not despair. You're not thinking, there's nothing I can do. It's a wonderful thing to teach at Boston College because a lot of the students are very animated. We've got to do this, we've got to do this, right? So they're willing to become agents of social change. They haven't yet hit that point of the really despair, there's nothing I can do, that kind of sets in after we get over 40, when you realize things may not be going the way we were hoping. But trying to push back against that, right? That active hope, it's not presumption, but it's not despair. And I think that's a real key attitude to try to cultivate, particularly working in this arena of peace. So I'll pause there and then love to talk about, some concrete strategies or any other things that you would like to as we move forward. Thank you so much for your time.
Let's have Julia talk next. We'll see if you can augment that a little bit before we have questions.
Sounds good. All right, let me get settled. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? No. Hello? Hello, hello? Hello? Okay, good. A little bit louder. Hello, hello, hello. Okay, just speak louder. Sounds good. Sounds good. Hello, my name is Julia Franco. I am a senior at Boston College. I'm in the International Studies Department studying conflict and cooperation, as well as let me just scoot up a little bit, a faith, peace, and justice minor. And it's really great to hear Professor Snyder talk. I've been working with him and learning from him since my freshman year. And it's funny because we wrote our kind of plan for what we were going to say a little bit separately. I read a little bit of what he was going to say, but a lot of my insights reflect and complement his. You can tell I was a student for much of my college career. I kind of worked off a lot of the questions that Babs gave us, and so I'll just kind of go off of that outline, and I really look forward to hearing y'all's questions and ideas again in the Q&A section. So I kind of, to start, what my approach is to peace building and what got me interested, I saw the word on a project my junior year of high school as just an idea for a research project, and ever since then I've been studying it and really fascinated by it. I would say my approach is based on an active grassroots embrace of complexity of conflicts themselves and the people within it. And that can be, we might be talking about within the US or internationally. I sense that both are important to people in this room. And it's funny that Professor Snyder also talked about that conflict is can be very productive. I think of Marshall Rosenberg's definition of at least violence as a tragic expression of unmet needs. And I think that can tell us that conflict can be a teacher. And it's our job to learn how to listen to it so that we can better understand the world we live in and the people in it. So what I've been trying to do now since I was, about 17, is learn how to listen to conflict. And that means learning how to listen to other people. And apart from that as well is just an alignment with Professor Snyder, a deep concern with dehumanization and the violence it causes. Because I've learned that dehumanization happens because one dehumanizes themselves first in order to be able to dehumanize the other. This kind of learning came from experiential as well. I went to South Africa with Professor Snyder, and I was also in Croatia in the spring studying the Balkan Wars of the 1990s and really kind of learning about how, in order to approach even conflict transformation, I think it really happens on the individual level and then interpersonal, and then we start working multi-scalar and multi-generational from there. Because, if we do violence to ourselves before we're able to commit violence against another, that's where we need to start. Is how do we heal the violence that we've done to ourselves in order to commit violence against another. And I also agree that, conflict transformation kind of unfolds against 3 different timelines: crisis prevention, crisis management, and conflict resolution and reconciliation, which are all interests of mine. So kind of moving on to my ideas of challenges and obstacles to building peace. I'm really happy that we're doing this forum because I think, again, fundamentally, if we can't have a conversation about it, I think at that point peace is unattainable. Whether that's political discourse, conversation about trauma, conversation about different hopes and visions of peace, if we can't talk about it civilly, in a way that, maybe it's iterative and it doesn't all happen in one session, but if we can't have a conversation about it, it's hard to build this bigger kind of sometimes like esoteric vision of peace. It can sometimes feel abstract and that it lacks a link to our real reality. But that can be really hard. That can be really hard, and it seems like that's a concern for everyone in this room. And I think I really had was looking through my journals from South Africa and Croatia when I thought about this question of how do you embrace or even just begin to speak with someone you disagree with. And I thought of this really, of course it's a different example, but when we were learning about the war in Croatia, we learned kind of a lot of people struggled with after the war this question of how, like, let's say from the Croatian and Bosnian point of view, how do we embrace a Chetnik? Was this kind of title of an article that we read, and a Chetnik being a Serb paramilitary personnel that part of the Serb paramilitary forces were perpetrating a lot of human rights crimes during the war. And so it's kind of this question that I wonder if you've posed to yourself in your lifetime: how do I pose someone from the other party? How do I embrace someone from the other party? And I think for me, what I've learned is that starts with learning their story, learning their narrative, and I think rehumanizing them, because it can become very detached from one's narrative to where they become a label. They become they're a bigot. You know, you can fill in the blank. But those labels kind of tend to empower our imagination and become self-serving, and confirmation bias starts kicking in. And I think a return to the narrative of the other is a really important starting point. And that involves you interacting with the other, maybe grabbing a coffee. And I think that kind of comes with it, recognizing their humanity. And I think it seems like a very simple thing to do, but I think I even need to catch myself and that I could do much better in that. And so I wonder if maybe one of the peace strategies for this group is to either work with other people from, a different kind of committee in Marlborough that have different political beliefs, and seeing if there are ways that there can be forums or debates or even just casual coffee chats where you talk about things other than politics. I also agree, we've studied a lot of theology together, and the idea of bringing our values into actions. I really, I enjoy drawing from Jonathan Sachs, which is, he's a Jewish theologian, and he teaches Jewish social ethics. And I really enjoyed, actually, I remember from freshman year reading about the home we build together. Is this idea that we are in one society and we may not share the same opinion, but we share a future, and that has to be enough for now. And I think that's really empowering. I know that's really empowering to young people, to feel that, we may have very different ways of going about things, but very different means to an end, but maybe our end is very similar. We want a prosperous future. We want to be healthy. We want to be happy. We want to have job opportunities. The list goes on. And I think I draw a lot of inspiration from the Serbian student protest movement at the moment. I don't know if you all are aware, but since November 4th of 2024, many Serbian students across the country have been protesting a canopy collapse, which killed civilians. And it was kind of the last straw in a string of political corruption cases. And so they've been protesting within the University of Belgrade, all around the country, going on marches from Belgrade to Kragujevac. And I actually, before I went to Croatia to study, I wound up joining them for a bit. And they were extremely inspiring in how they are not only kind of leading this movement, but also the way they are able to live their values. And I draw a lot of inspiration from them, that this is possible, that young people are getting really involved in this, that this is also not all on the backs of young people. I think we need to stop thinking that way. For people who do, I think the narrative that climate change or AI or conflicts are like, oh, I'm so sorry we gave you this hand, but I hope you do well with it. I think that's not great to hear from the other side. And there are a lot of young people who I find are very active already. And it's not that they don't see the need for activism, but they crave the know-how as well as the inspiration and the experience of what to do and how to make it sustainable and effective. I think that's what I think a lot of people struggle with. And also, I think activism and peace is as much emotional as it is intellectual. So I can speak for myself, I'm new on this earth, and feelings of hopelessness and helplessness are really hard to deal with. And so I think inspiring youth about how to move through these emotions, how to process them, but then keep going on, is really important. How to harness them into empowering strategies that actually make a difference. I think, make a difference if that's 1 millimeter, a day, and then in 20 years you find that your trajectory has changed. I think that's still great. I kind of made some notes about kind of what I think this intergenerational healing can look like. And solidarity as well. I think it's extremely important. And we're seeing it all over the world, and we're seeing it in ways that just, I think, amplify the impact that a group of people can make. And again, it's not that young people aren't acting, but I think they crave some guidance and some help. I have a lot of friends who are protesting all around Boston, have been protesting since the Hamas's invasion on October 7th. And I find that older generations have experience in social movements and previous political administrations and crises, which is a huge asset and a teacher for younger people. And so if I can say anything, I think intergenerational programs within this committee could be really fruitful. I'm a part of Pax Christi USA, and they have a Peace Pairs program where I'm paired with someone who is an older peace activist, and it has been such a pleasure and a joy to work with her. It's really helped me because I'll go to her with questions and how do I lean on community? How do I cope with despair? How do I derive strength from joy? I think it's really important. I don't think, we talk about joy enough when it comes to activism. I think it's very important. And kind of just saying, you're not alone, and dispelling that myth of this is on your shoulders. But no, you're not alone. And we're going to all fight together because I want my grandchildren and my children to have the opportunities that hopefully you all have had. So I think that is maybe an interesting idea, doing some kind of intergenerational program with different members of the community. And I think if you offer the invitation, I think a lot of young people would take it. I also really I interned for Massachusetts Peace Action, does some really great work. And I was a youth activist intern in their climate change and nuclear disarmament campaign. And I really appreciated them constantly telling me of my value to the group. And, even though I had very little experience, inviting me to workshops, inviting me to pitch in on campaign strategy meetings, really, how do you think this will engage the youth? I think that's also a great idea, is to kind of really allow youth to kind of take the involvement that they, I think, can do and want to do. So, yeah, that's all I'll say for now, but I'm just really honored to be here, and thank you so much for allowing me to speak. Thank you.
All right, let's pass it down to Jamie. The plan is for everybody to have a little blah blah, and then we'll try and figure out what we want to do, which is always the harder part.
Excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. Sorry to be a few minutes late. And honored to be on this panel with Professor Snyder and Julia. And I actually, I did not go to Boston College, but I went to Boston College Law School.
Excellent.
And really was very influenced by the Jesuit education and focus on service. So honored to be on this panel with you. And Babs, thank you so much for coming up with this idea. And, I'd say that as a legislator, sometimes we're kind of very much sometimes too focused on specific bills and not sort of higher concepts and how to create greater social change. So I really appreciate listening to both of you talk about those sort of 30,000 foot bigger concepts and what we as elected officials can do and obviously all of us can do. And particularly appreciate Bab's focus on peace. And I know we had a chance to talk to her a couple weeks ago about all the amazing work she does on peace in her life. And I called her the other day because I was saying, okay, this is a forum on peace. So what does that mean? What do you want me to talk about? So I fortunately had some time to think about it. And there have been a few ways that I've, at least in my view, I've been involved with promoting peace or fostering peace as a legislator. So want to just touch upon 4 areas, and more often than not, they tend to be a little bit more focused on legislation or programs, versus perhaps bigger picture. But I'm hoping they address bigger picture issues around violence and peace. So the four sort of areas, if you will, the first is restorative justice, which, just listening to Professor Snyder, some of those concepts really came to me about the work that I've done on that. Reducing police civilian conflict and sort of that power dynamic, and avoiding unnecessary deaths or conflict between police and civilians. Government violence, which right now I would say really around immigration, which I do a lot of work to support immigrants. And then sort of related to, we live in a country, we live in a society where, really at the federal level, the United States spends a lot of money on the military, far more than, almost any other country. Usually, dozens of countries' military budgets don't even come close to what the U.S. spends on the military, and I happen to oppose that. I think we should spend less on the military. So there is a little bit of state legislation on that. So the first category on restorative justice is, I know a fair amount of people here in the room were advocates for criminal justice reform. So that was a movement that was started around 2014, 2015 to say Massachusetts, though certainly has an incarceration rate that is less than most other states, particularly red states, we still have a fairly high incarceration rate. Massachusetts sort of went through the tough on crime era. You think about the response to Willie Horton from the 1980s. And so in some ways, a lot of the things that happened at the federal level around mandatory minimums really started in Massachusetts in the 1990s in the legislature. So what restorative justice is, really is looking about, how do you address the harm to all parties? And so, the person who commits a crime is referred to as the responsible party, and then the victim, if you will, is usually referred to as the impacted party. And what restorative justice is, and we were able to pass this as part of the 2018 criminal justice reform package, is to put that into law, that was explicitly an option for police chiefs and prosecutors, that if someone had committed a crime, instead of going through a court process where not only was there a punishment that really often didn't have an impact on the person who committed the crime, in other words, it wasn't really going to lead to prevention or that person recommitting a crime, it also did almost nothing for the victim or the impacted party. In other words, the person who was impacted didn't really understand why the person caused harm to him or herself, and therefore, in many ways was left still, hurt or having trauma. So just as a couple of examples of what's happened since that's been put into law. And I will say, I'm not entirely sure. I actually, unfortunately, don't think that Marlborough participates in restorative justice. So I certainly encourage it, that a possible option is to encourage the Marlborough police chief to embrace this. Most of the towns in this area do have adopted restorative justice as an option. There have been incidents, and usually these are around young people, where a young person sprayed on graffiti a Nazi symbol on a synagogue, at the outside of a synagogue. And that person perhaps didn't entirely understand what the Nazi symbol meant. And so what the police chief in that town decided to do, this was in Concord, is directed that person to go through restorative justice. And so that person had to interact not only with the members of the synagogue, but also had to better understand, what was the Holocaust, how were, what was it, obviously discrimination, horrific killing of millions of Jews, and what the Nazi symbol meant in that context. And, oh, thank you. So that, for that person that probably would have had a minor fine, quite honestly, in district court, pay a fine, This young person happened to come from a wealthy family, so probably wasn't going to be really impacted by paying a fine, and would not have understood, what the Nazi symbol meant. So that young person had a much greater understanding. The person had to do community service. I think the person, in interacting what's called a restorative justice circle, really gained a greater understanding of the harm that he had caused to, in that case, the members of the Jewish community at that temple. So that was very powerful. And then more recently, during sort of the Black Lives Matter movement, someone in another town, the town of Arlington, had an older person or middle-aged person had taken down a Black Lives Matter banner from a church, and had threw it into a pond or something in the town. So that person, instead of sort of getting a fine for stealing or trespassing on property, actually had to interact not only with the members of the church, but better understand racial injustice that's happened in this country. So that was an experience that, had a more positive impact for the members of that church, and in that case, some members of the Black community in that town. And the person, the responsible party, the person who committed that offense, better understood, what Black Lives Matter movement was and about racial injustice. So this is a specific option that was passed in the 2018 reform. And so, I would just lift that up, is that what we've seen is not only police chiefs and prosecutors referring people, again, and you have to get the approval of the victims to go through that process. But what's happening now is, I also do a lot of work in the state prisons, is now you have incarcerated people that have created restorative justice circles in the prison, where they actually, I'd be the first to say, attending some of these circles, very intense, but they actually apologize for the crimes that they committed. And it actually creates a much more positive environment in the prison, which unfortunately are quite violent cultures and very unsafe. So that's just one example, restorative justice. On the sort of de-escalation front, and this is really where I appreciate the leadership of a lot of police chiefs, is that what a lot of police chiefs have been leading on is that often, and you read these just terrible incidents in the paper, is that someone who has a mental health challenge or a mental health emergency or crisis, but they happen to be holding a knife outside their apartment or something, the police comes, and without de-escalation skills, which I know Professor Snyder mentioned, without de-escalation skills, that person is killed, the civilian is killed. So what the police have recognized is that, despite the fact that most police departments have de-escalation training, at the end of the day, police officers don't have, or don't always have access to the full access to training for de-escalation versus mental health professionals. So what many police departments have in this area, in sort of Metro West area, is they partner with actually a licensed therapist or mental health counselor that's actually either at the police department, or it can be quickly, called when there is a mental health crisis, to quickly actually go to where someone is having a crisis, but perhaps is threatening to hurt someone or kill someone. And actually, it's led to many, many outcomes of, no violence happening, and the person perhaps getting some sort of mental health treatment. But at the end of the day, that police officer is not having to draw his or her weapon or hurt the individual. So what we did in the budget this year is that we did, and I was really pleased because it was a relatively tough budget year, is we secured about $19 million to expand this program. So this program is going to be expanded across Massachusetts, so more police departments can hire mental health professionals to partner when these incidents happen, versus just the police response, which unfortunately can lead to terrible violence. So that's on the de-escalation front. On the immigration front, I don't think I have to tell anyone here. I know, looking out, most people here are from Hudson or Marlborough, but there's been a large number of arrests of undocumented immigrants. Just so people have a sense, I probably get a message every other day of another immigrant who's been arrested. And obviously that means, and it's usually a husband or father, that they are, being separated from their wife, from their kids, extremely traumatic. There's been some videos of children being left in a car or being left in their apartment, in their home. It's absolutely horrific. So beyond the legislation that's being considered at the state level, and I will say there's not too much we can do at the state because these are unfortunately federal agents, is that what has formed is called the LUCE network, and that's a hotline that people can call. So when you see someone in your neighborhood who's getting arrested, you can call LUCE, and that provides a network that will get that person a lawyer, that will provide support to the family. And so, when I think of peace or when I think of violence, such a violent act to separate, a family. And one of the first really publicized cases in Massachusetts came from Marlborough. So a young man named Lucas that was arrested in March by ICE, which, as far as I can tell, he was racially profiled just down the street by ICE agents. And we were able to get a lawyer for him. And even though he was sent within a few days to a Texas ICE facility, due to his excellent lawyer, Lucas was able to be released by a judge. And about 2 months later, he's now reunited with his wife and now two children. But what the LUCE network did is recognize that you're not going to have a violent response to what ICE did, right? You're not going to try to go after the ICE officers. As horrible as what they are doing, you have to have a peaceful response to that. That's observing sometimes ICE officers in a neighborhood. That's obviously due process, making sure due process is protected. And what can we do to support the families when the husband or father is arrested, which more often than not is the main breadwinner for the family, and therefore that family is financially insecure. So I just put that out there because there are this LUCE network is something that people here could join, be part of, kind of support families. And again, I would emphasize that particularly Hudson, Marlborough, and Acton in my district, there's a large number of undocumented immigrants, usually Brazilian, who are getting arrested. The last area, which is a specific bill, speaking about the U.S. military, is there are efforts, and it's led, Julie, I was glad to hear you're part of Mass Peace Action because I work very closely with Mass Peace Action, is that one of their major bills is that our pension system, our investments, the state investments, some of those investments are in companies that produce weapons that are bombs that are obviously designed to kill people. So there is an effort to divest our state, in some ways taxpayer dollars or our state investments from companies in Massachusetts that are building these weapons. Just because we're in Marlborough, to be absolutely directly clear, one of them is Raytheon, but there's other companies too. But anyhow, this is an effort to divest from any company that builds basically mass weapons of destruction or bombs. It's a bill that I've co-sponsored, and Mass Peace Action is leading on this. So that's something that there's a lot of talk about climate divestment as well. I just wanted to mention that there's also this effort to divest from companies that make military weapons or bombs, and that is a role that the legislature can take to take action. So restorative justice, de-escalation, immigration, sort of state violence, and U.S. military are some of the things that I work on. And again, learning these the concepts the two of you have brought up, and how can we better explain the importance of these efforts and obviously expand these efforts. So thank you so much.
So where do we go with it all? Comments, questions, brilliant ideas, anything? Yeah, or
I was on a call with leaders of Indivisible Massachusetts, and LUCE, L-U-C-E, is a very good organization for individuals that want to know how to respond to ICE. There was discussions and some differences in understanding, and they're going to explore it more, and how individuals should, sorry, I'll stand up, how individuals should respond when they witnessed something with ice. Some people were saying that they were shouting to the individual to give them a name and a phone number of people to call. Other people were told, no, don't do that because they don't want ICE to call that person who might also be undocumented. And so it seems like at this point, one of the things they said to do was to not interfere and just bear witness with videos. And I just like your comments on disputing, or, you know, people wanting to help but not know how to respond.
Absolutely, it sounds like a question for me.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it's peacefully observing, you know, the actions of the ICE agents. You know, we have done a lot of education. I know Rep. Gentile, Rep. Gregoire and I were recently at the Immaculate Conception Church, where Father Stephen, you know, asked us to come and organize MIRA to help explain to undocumented immigrants their rights. You know, so if you're undocumented, you should already, you know a lawyer. You know, you should be ready to call a lawyer, or, you know, to call your spouse or family member to call that lawyer. But as far as, you know, all of us as observers, I think it's just, you know, taking pictures, documenting it, calling Luce or Luce, it's called two different things, I guess. And they, you know, can provide more professional guidance for specific people.
Okay. They also
So I don't know
said
if that answers
something,
your questions.
yeah, they also said something about making sure that you don't assume that it's ICE, because if you assume it's ICE and it's another federal agency, that you can get in trouble for accusing them of being ICE when they're not ICE or something like that. I'm not sure how you know, because they're not really wearing uniforms, are they?
Well, they're definitely wearing uniforms, and disgracefully, you know, the Trump-Vance administration is pulling in all other federal agents, you know, so ATF and, you know, other agents but essentially to enforce immigration law. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, so it might not say ICE. Unfortunately, a lot of them, which is very misleading, says police, you know, even though they're not local police, and really praise the Marlborough police chief for saying very clearly, you know, we're not involved in enforcing immigration law. So he's been, you know, I've talked to him a couple of times, he's very good. And I would say most chiefs are very good as well. But, you know, I would say it's a variety of federal agents. Yeah.
Okay.
Chris, this is kind of your bailiwick. Did you want to say anything?
Well, just the Luce it's a great organization, and they're rigorous. And the idea is not just to call so that you're reporting something going on and you'll know what to do, but to call to verify that in fact is going on. Mm-hmm. And they also train teams of observers to come out. And so they'll come out to verify that it is in fact, you know, an ICE kidnapping that you're seeing. And they'll kind of know more how to respond in the moment. There's also every Wednesday and every Thursday at the ICE building in Burlington.
Yeah. Yep.
There are 300 to 400 people.
Okay.
Now this is it's in the office park right next to the Burlington Mall. I used to work in that office park. It's a very anodyne, you know, looking kind of place.
Right.
But it's a horror chamber. They're keeping the people there for weeks. And you've seen stories about it, I think, in the paper. WBUR just did a very good story recently. There was a woman who was an activist from Essex County who was had to report yesterday, after having reported a month or so ago. A group of picketers showed up to kind of witness for her, and she was let go. And then yesterday, Tuesday, yeah. Mm-hmm. There was about 300 people, including probably about 24 clergy who walked her in her appointment, and she got a 1 year, a 1 year reprieve on reporting. So it's a pretty powerful thing, well done, easy to get involved with, and there's a second day been added Thursdays from 11 to 1, and it's actually somebody whose name I saw but don't remember, from Assabet Valley Indivisible, organized that. The Wednesday outing was actually just a couple from Burlington who had just, to start doing this on Wednesdays. And the building is owned by the guy who owns the Cafe Espedro in Burlington. So don't go to dinner there.
If people want to participate in that, can they get in touch with you, Chris?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
There's something else that attorneys are saying. If you know the person and they have an attorney, you see to it that everybody who knows that person knows the attorney's number. Because the minute they stop them, they take every electronic thing away. So if it's me being stopped, I can't necessarily call, but I need to know the attorney's number because they're taking them out of state as fast as they can. And it's important for the attorneys to be able to get to wherever they are. And so attorneys are suggesting that. And that means you can have, a friends or yourself, the person who might be snatched, or anybody in the family, so there's a chance they won't be grabbed and taken to Louisiana or Texas or wherever they think of.
I know you've been working on this with the local churches. How well organized do you think it is?
Oh, local churches in this area?
Yeah.
I would say not well organized at all. Yep. Yep. So it's really, to what Chris said, is the, loose aid people stepping up to help out. Yep. Mm-hmm.
But you said an Anglican section actually hosted an event for their parishioners who were at risk.
Yes, yes. And then some of the Brazilian churches I've helped organize too. Yep. Mm-hmm. So that's good, but I would say that I would love to see the pastors or, rabbis in the area be more active.
Mm-hmm. In what way? Says Pastor who lives in Marlborough.
Oh, forgive me.
Oh, girl. No, really, that's a serious question, because I will tell you that I serve down in Franklin, Mass.
Okay.
But I have a ton of colleagues who go to Burlington every week. But they're the ones that serve closer to Burlington. Mm-hmm. And it's a little easier for them. And so we're kind of divided into areas of Massachusetts. But how would you like to see ministers and clergy more involved?
I would say, and forgive me if I'm mistaken, but is there an interfaith group in Marlborough of religious leaders?
I'm assuming there is. I don't serve in Marlborough. I live in Marlborough, but I serve.
Oh, okay.
So there's an interfaith group in Franklin where I serve, and I would imagine there's one in Marlborough.
I don't think there is.
No,
Yeah.
Kaz would be the person who would know. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I will say, I would love to see, for lack of a better term, the, white pastors or rabbis work more closely to support the Brazilian churches that generally have very few resources, and obviously a large percentage of their congregation are undocumented. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to see collaboration there to support the families. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, right, because then, what I've been frustrated, that would allow the white congregants to be able to then make those connections. Because right now, the idea of having those folks who are undocumented getting their phone numbers to some of us, I don't have those connections. So how does that happen? And I think the idea of it happening through the churches is an obvious venue for sure. So yeah, that's something maybe some of us can work on if we've been on the church or show set.
If I can just give an example, which doesn't involve religious leaders, but what happened in August is another one of my constituents, actually from Ayer, was arrested. He worked at the Sorrento's Pizza in Acton. So we were able to get him a lawyer, and he just got released to his family last week. That was really a network of the indivisibles, in the Acton area. And the bond for him to get out of Plymouth County House of Corrections was $12,000. So we created a GoFundMe account, and we raised the money to get him out of jail. So just like financial resources, including perhaps from, churches, synagogues, or mosques would be great.
Go ahead.
I'd like to change the subject for a minute. These are all good ideas but they're Band-Aids. And so, getting to the crux of the problem, so I'm going to throw something out here. In 1948, the Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the UN, but the United States has still yet to adopt a formal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, Eleanor Roosevelt was the one who aggregated the information that went into that document. It would seem to me that our legal system and our judge and Supreme Court judges and so forth needs a center, a base of which our laws need to be held against. And certainly we've allowed that to be the Supreme Court itself. And now that, it's been politicized with the Supreme Court, and you've got judges that are on one side or the other side, and if you get more on one side than the other side, you get a certain outcome. And we're seeing the pullback of progress that was made in human rights, human dignity, right, going forward. And we're still seeing it. It's like we're wondering what's going to happen with the existing rules that are coming up to the docket of the Supreme Court. If we had a Declaration of Human Rights, if only, and this is just right, if only there was some, we adopted it. It was Eleanor Roosevelt who had made it, but yet, although we signed it, we haven't adopted it within and haven't agreed to incorporate it into our legal system.
Okay, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that. So one of the areas that I work on is Guatemala. Guatemala was one of the original signatories of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And so I do a lot of work on transitional justice. So how do you move from a conflict society to a non-conflict? Rights are valuable in that they create a framework, but what I've learned a lot from looking at these conflict zones, even though they were signatory of the UN Declaration of Human Rights and the subsequent conventions and constitutions, for 36 years they were engaged in an armed conflict that led to genocide. So the declaration itself, unless you have also the promotion of civil society to hold it accountable, really is somewhat impotent. So I think it's really important, but at the same time, you need and this is where I think it's important to build up local communities promoting the common good, that they can actually, if not hold those accountable, hold the members of their community accountable. So yes, it would be nice to have that universal declaration in the United States. Short of that, what can we do at a community level? Julia mentioned Rabbi Sachs. Jonathan Sachs writes a lot about rights and the corresponding responsibility. Rights set up a contract, but responsibility comes from citizens. So, I mean, I don't know, I totally appreciate your point, but what I want to also, period. And in addition to that, I think we could look at, in the absence of it, how do you promote responsible citizens that can bolster the common good at the local level?
It's a two-way street.
Oh, yeah.
The legal system,
Yeah.
the police, right? How do we get them to agree on on following a Declaration of Human Rights? Or how do we start? How do we get that to be a basis and then start formulating? I see it taking decades, but it's based on what's been happening now. But still, it's where's the movement to make it to make that happen, right? To start at that base of just what's really important, what are our values, and hold our laws accountable to those values, right? That's what I'm getting at. Something that may fix it beyond just, and on both sides of the aisle, the police, the ICE agents, right? How do you hold them to task on considering family important, on making dignity important to individuals, right? And as you mentioned, it's, both sides.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think a lot of what a big question not question, it's an issue. There's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of ignorance in this country and elsewhere too, but regarding the situation of the immigrant. What's the history of immigration? Why are these people here? I taught high school Spanish, and one of the courses I taught was Spanish anymore. It was history, civilization, and culture of the Latin American countries and Spain, Spanish-speaking countries. Is there any effort going on to educate? I mean, getting groups of people together and then having them actually listen to an immigrant story. There are so many stories that they tell. I work for a nonprofit now, helping everybody. I mean, not just immigrants, but anybody that needs furniture. It's the furniture bank. That's it. And some of the stories I hear, because I speak Spanish, are horrific. And if people can only be made to understand. This is the reality of this man here. But this is his family, and they came here for this reason. They were being extorted in their own country, and their daughter was being threatened by gangs. I mean, there's so many. I would love to be involved in attempting to educate
Okay,
the
this
public
kind
at
of touches on
large.
some of the things you were talking about, Julia.
Yeah, I think that's a tremendous idea. Yeah.
A restorative law for immigration, right?
Right, oh my goodness, yes.
Yes, I actually, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, go ahead, please.
I really enjoyed what you had, oh, sorry. I can speak up. I really enjoyed what you had to say about restorative justice circles and nonviolent communication. Currently working with the BC student offices to bring in restorative justice practices when it comes to Title IX cases and racism on campus and all sorts of problems. I'm also working in an incarceration facility in Pondville and doing NBC with them. So kind of just what you were speaking to. I think I'm curious with your idea, Joy, I love your name, Joy, how you would gather the people together, and how would you pinpoint people who you feel to be ignorant, and how do you bring them into a space where they don't feel like they're being labeled as ignorant, because I feel like that would not go over well. No, probably not. And not that that's what you're thinking to do, but yeah. Did you know?
Me?
Yeah.
I just want to point out, a while ago, and I don't know how many years, for years, we had a conversation circle that was supposedly, you came if you didn't speak English, you came if you spoke English, about 50-50. And it was unbelievable that every week in the library, it was a different library, But the thing is, there were maybe 20-30 people, and just what you were talking about, the stories, but it was on both sides, because it turned out that, people had ancestral stories, the English-speaking, whatever, but it didn't matter how bad the English was. Boy, did people get there, because they were talking about stories, they were talking about some people brought their kids, which was noisy, we tried to discourage it, they didn't have a babysitter, and the people, the amount, it's wonderful. English is a language that no matter how poorly you speak it, you can make yourself understood. I go store tomorrow. Fine. We don't care about grammar. It really works. But the thing is, it was supposed to be to learn English, but it wasn't just English. the thing is, we haven't got public spaces enough. This library, got to sign the room up, it's all a deal. It wasn't constructed, we have no community centers. They're not included in any of these, build these huge buildings that you have to, the big public community center. The senior center was built as a senior center, it's closed at 4 o'clock, but things should be open all the time. The same thing with the schools, they're off there and the kids are isolated in the school district. But the thing is, this kind of learn English could happen in schools. It could happen, high school, junior high school level, or whatever, you go to school. And you don't, it's all about like, yeah, this is where you're living, it's the US, we got all this stuff going on. But the immigrant families are coming with the stories, they can bring their parents in maybe. I don't know how to organize it, but it could really be, we're like, I'm thinking the dying malls could possibly be spaces. If you can get there with a car, we got the bus stop. But we have, the malls, big spaces that you could really chop up and have childcare in one corner so the adults could go, just with some imagination.
Okay, let's put that in the pile of things we talk about.
Sorry?
Put that in the pile of things we talk about in our small meeting after this.
If I can explain, I'm sorry, could I get the,
I'm saying that
to Joy's comment is, and I should mention, and so appreciate this gathering because I'm also the Democratic State Committee person for the Senate District. So we did a forum in Acton around immigration where we had, immigrants tell their stories. So certainly something like that could be done here in Marlborough. What from a strategy point of view, as horrific as what President Trump is doing, the polling has shown that because, I think it's over 80% of the immigrants that ICE or other agents are arresting have no criminal record, is that actually has impacted Americans in the middle to better appreciate, immigration and to better understand. And so what we've specifically tried to do, and it's difficult for these families, is when someone does get arrested is to try to tell their stories. So that's what we did with Lucas in Marlborough back in March, and it does move people. Because I think the challenge is if you have a forum, pretty much just people that are already, Democrats or progressives who show up. So how do you reach the people in the middle? And I do think that's where houses of, places of worship, religious worship, can bring people in. So.
Go ahead. Yep.
The mega people, they have the internet. And if you talk to them, they will tell you, this is all false. This is all false. This is all lies because it's not on the internet. Only believe what's on the internet. And so as long as we're dealing with the whole country being involved in this, somehow we have to get the word out to the people who don't listen to other people, who only listen to the people.
I just really want to emphasize, you're not going to get, the 20% MAGA people. It's getting the people in the middle that, were not doing well economically under Biden, or they felt they weren't doing well, so they said, I'm going to vote for Trump. It's those middle voters. And actually, they are very moved by around immigration, so that's where you want to focus.
But I'm saying we need a better way of broadcasting to the general population. And if you're going to influence a lot
we
of...
all have social media. I'm very active. You can say you can. Right. Yeah.
I think we need to be better.
You can't give up. Yeah.
Chris, talking about active on social media. Go
Of this last exchange is that getting the stories out, the people that I know.
Yes.
And what are of course, it would be nice if we still had a local newspaper, but those days are gone. But on the patch, on local Facebook groups, I think those are places where you can tell individual stories. And even in some of the reddest and most backward places in the country, where they say, you go to Idaho, southern Idaho, and they'll say, yeah, get rid of the immigrants, but not my Mexicans. Right. Because I know them. And so anything so that would be an interesting thing to try to organize for people to write, people who have stories to write them. And not, and so I met a guy last week who came in for a couch, who works 3 jobs, who, blah, 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 blah.
I've done a little bit of that.
Can I just offer one insight? Like, I think a great point that's coming up is, how do you think of education creatively? As someone who's in higher education and it's under attack from both honestly, the left and the right, when you've lost sort of like John Dickerson is critiquing higher education, you've gone wrong, like in terms of higher education. So what has to happen is, how do we think of education creatively and happening in alternative venues? So, Joy, I kind of felt like this is where you were thinking really creatively. And I'm sorry, what's your name, my friend?
Alice.
Alice, you were thinking like, how do we use alternative spaces? But if we're only privileging education in actual institutions of like either public schools or institutions of higher education, we're going to miss the mark. So how do you create opportunities for encounter? And
Let me call Clement for a second. Our musician is slipping out the back, Jack. And so I wanted to give him a hand.
yeah, so like thinking, how do we create alternative educational spaces? Because the majority of folks that you want to have move in a particular direction may not be in the educational spaces that you're going to be able to address. When I was in Philadelphia doing work, I was part of a group called the Interfaith Hospitality Network. And basically we created our social action teams. So all the different communities, you had representation from various faiths, but you would have a team that came together. You would have different creative places to offer educational opportunities, places of encounter to meet and hear the stories, whether it was at a church, a synagogue, a mosque, like different civic places as well. But there was an opportunity to like creatively listen to each other and encounter each other in a space that wasn't formally academic. And I think that's really important.
I'd be worried ICE agents come in. It would be a place where they could, so virtual might be more in today's day.
True, but I mean, in terms of ICE cannot enter a house of worship without, I'm going to turn this over to my legal counsel here. There's a specific warrant that they need to have. Judicial warrant, right? To actually enter a house of worship.
Well, I think what it is so far they have not entered houses of worship, I think because they realize that would be so offensive. So far, knowing this administration, I think they would violate the law. I think they're looking at it politically as that would be too far. So I think we should have these events in places of worship. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, actually on that point, there was, thank you. Sorry, I want to make sure that you all could hear okay. On that point, there was an ice truck seen on Boston College campus near the St. Ignatius Church that a lot of students go to, a Saturday before church. So me and some professors and some students stood to witness outside. So even if they can't come into the church, they may be outside the church waiting for parishioners, especially at Spanish Mass, to be coming out. So that's kind of a caveat to that, unfortunately. Also, I really like these ideas about the virtual storytelling exchange. I have a few organizations that I've worked with that do really great work with this. One is the Guestbook Project. Dr. Richard Kearney is the boss for the Guestbook Project. And I can write it down and give it to Babs to circulate to you guys. They do really incredible work all over the world in terms of youth sharing their own stories, kind of having it videotaped and then on their website. And I bet they would be really willing to have kind of something like this, a conversation like this on their website. Then it goes on their social media and all sorts, and it ripples from there. Also, an adjacent organization that does really good work is called Narrative 4. And what they do is in person. It is in person, but it can be virtual, where the structure of it is really interesting. So what they do is, the whole saying is like walking in somebody else's shoes. It's doing that with a labeled other. And so it's teaching one another how to host this other in a way of, so you tell, like let's say I'm telling my story and I tell my story for about 5 minutes or less, and then Babs tells her story, and then I pretend that I'm Babs, and I have to listen so deeply that I have to pretend I'm Babs for the next 5 minutes afterwards. And now she has to pretend that she's me. And so in that way, you really start using your imagination, your empathy, your feeling. And what they found is that after these exchanges, they empathize more. They're like, whoa, I was given the task to feel what that felt like for a little bit. Wow. And it's more than just being told, it's more interactive. So I think there's some really, like Professor Snyder is saying, there's some really creative options here that are online and in person. If you feel like online is safer, there's partner organizations that, like nonprofits, that would be really great to work with. Braver Angels also does really great dialogue work and debate forums. We're doing a Braver Angels project on Boston College campus about political discourse. We're planning that at the moment. And so there are, like, I would just look in your area or even just nationwide because it's virtual, there's more choices. There are organizations that can help you plan this and promote it as well. So.
Can I make a request that maybe after this that you get us a list and be given?
Absolutely, I will, yes, I
Yeah.
can send it to you.
That'd be very good.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Just 19, it's in Berlin, but 19 Carter Street hosts Braver Angels once a month, I think, so you could know that. And I just wanted to say, in terms of education, the Community Advocate published a letter to the editor for me. Now it was about pesticides, but they might also, if it was written in a certain way, publish a letter about a story, or if it's a story about immigrants too, if it's personal and you write it in a certain way. I think that's possible, so don't discount that as well.
Good point, good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Okay, other ideas, back there, back there.
So I want to get back up to a slightly higher level here, because I feel like we're a little in the weeds, which is a good place to be for a lot of us. But while we are so focused on helping immigrants connect with their lawyers, this school committee is banning books in the school library, and this group is totally trashing LGBTQ youth, and there's a lot more going on. And it struck me the times I've stood out with Babs and others with a simple sign that says peace, and I get like sworn at. I'm thinking, you're really against peace? How are you against peace? But what is peace to them versus peace to me? And peace to me is, it's not losing right after right after right. It's not being attacked for all of my identities. It's knowing that my grandson can get any book he wants out of the public library. All those things in my mind are acts of violence against us. And I don't feel like, I think peace is a concept for a democracy, and I feel like we're losing our democracy, and we need to get to, some of us at least, need to keep an eye on that higher level of not that all this other stuff isn't great, but I mean, every Sunday I'm supposed to go and let my congregation know all the crap that's going on in the world and then leave them with hope. And to me, the only way to do that is to go from the specific to the broad, or the broad to the specific. But everything in that spectrum is needed. And the last thing I'll say is, you have no idea, probably a lot of you have no idea how lucky we are to actually be in Massachusetts. I have colleagues all over the country. Things are so much, not that things are great here all the time, but things are, and I don't know if there's something we can learn from some of these other states who are much more in the weeds and in the thick of it than we really are. I don't know if that's, I mean, you might know better than anybody else here.
Let's see what Joshua has to say, because this is big picture stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, that's Bev.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question, right? Not losing sight of the importance of peace. And again, I'm gonna start with a practice. So I think as we try to get from the granular to the universal, we need to start with a practice. Almost every peace builder that I've worked with has talked about this idea of either the center or the pause. That you build the best peace, you advocate from the best places when you yourself are in a situation of connecting to your most authentic self. When you're not connected with your most authentic self, your moral imagination is defunct, you're not thinking creatively. So even though this sounds like lame, right, that we're not gonna get, I think it's a really important point that how do we begin, if we're gonna get big picture, from a position of our best self, thinking imaginatively, how do we envision an alternative reality to this, where peace and fact can be present. Most of us have experienced, since the end of World War II, 80 years of sort of a political order that, for ill or for bad, was relatively stable, right? Over the last 8 years, things have really shifted in terms of geopolitics. As we begin to try to respond to that, how do we do it from a place of creative imagination? I think is really, really important. Again, it seems like a very banal point, but you know, as a pastor, I'm sure, like, you know, you're your most creative, you're your most dynamic when you're speaking from that sense of your truest authentic self. And then, you know, how do we share that with others in a way that is productive, rather than, you know, creating these adversarial opportunities?
I think
Hold
we
on, we
can
got
learn a
Dave
lot
back there.
from,
Hey.
just a quick comment.
Okay.
I think we can learn a lot from Martin Luther King,
Mhm.
who was in a similar situation as what we're dealing with today, only on many different levels today. But, you know, he promoted peace, and that's, we can learn a lot from history.
Agreed. Dave?
Okay, so it seems that where we are right now in history is very close, very similar to when we were at the Civil War, okay? One of the things that came out of the Civil War is it divided families. It had brother against brother, okay? Boy, does that sound familiar today. I mean, seriously, I have family members that I can't talk to, okay? And it's embarrassing, okay? Because honestly, I would like to talk to them, but they're dismissing me, okay? You know, they know what my beliefs are, right? If I was out there, they may be one of the ones giving you the finger, but they feel that they're right, okay? And their belief system is so integrated in different levels, okay? You know, a lot of them are fundamentalists, you know, and, you know, I'm a Unitarian. Boy, your light blows their mind, you know?
How dare you?
Yeah, I started as a Catholic too, woo, you know, but, you know, I think how do we break through this and have authentic conversations with family members that are not escalating but disarming, okay, in such a way that we express from a point of confidence and strength of what we believe in and trying to understand them to come back to us and say, okay, why is this disconnect going on? You know, because their fundamental beliefs are just piled on top of each other. You know, and you can't get through just one of them. But if you look at it, the stack is the same for all of them. So how do we get through that? Because
Mary Beth, put on your psychology hat for a second. You see any possibilities there for the group? In terms of conversations across?
Are you talking
Yeah.
to Mary Rose?
Mary Rose, sure.
I really, what appealed to me the most, listening to the various things at the beginning, was the idea of peace training. The parallel with the military getting trained in all these different techniques that they have, including a mental set. Is there a curriculum, as it were, for peace training, because it could bring, congregations might be interested, different congregations might be interested in having a night for their congregation. We've been spectating psychologists for many years. I'd be interested in what might be part of a curriculum for peace training, because there could be pieces of that I have no clue about, and I'd like to have more strategies.
She was saying that a peace curriculum, a way of training people to have conversations with peace as the, would be. I think that deep listening that, I'm sorry, I forgot your name already.
No, go ahead.
I think that deep listening is one way to try and have conversations with people, because what you really need, you need to be your authentic self. They need to hear that that's your authentic self, and you need to hear what their authentic self is. And not listen in a defensive manner, but listen from a place of curiosity rather than from trying to change someone's mind. Which maybe is what a peace curriculum would teach us.
So real quickly, just to hit on that idea of peace curriculum, I mean, that's kind of what I'm trying to put together at Boston College. And the very first training we looked at was nonviolent communication. So how are we able to speak from our true sense of self, feelings, articulate needs, and turn that need into an actionable request? To your point, I forget your name in the back, sir, but like,
Dave?
Is it Dave?
Dave.
Dave. Like, as you're mentioning, we have families where that's not even possible, right? But if we train ourselves in learning those skills of nonviolent communication, then how could we pair that with restorative justice practices, active bystander intervention practices? Then you could get into strategic action practices. So there's really like kind of a good guideline of sets of trainings that would be very helpful to try to learn these skills and practices. That I think, part of my goal at Boston College is to create hubs where we can offer these trainings. So, one of the things we're trying to do is offer, if you wanted one here, we'd be happy to do it. Like, if you're interested in nonviolent communication or active bystander intervention.
Just a second, Alice. You've had experience around the world with similar listening projects. Can you amplify for them how that went or didn't go?
Absolutely. And I just wanted to thank you, Dave, for speaking to this, because this is really hard, and I relate. I also have family members who think very differently, and it can...
She comes from Texas.
I come from Texas. and it can be like we're, just keep running into the same problems, and that image of just kind of, just feeling like you're trying the same tactic, but it's getting nowhere. I found that I do want to second what Professor Snyder said. NVC, nonviolent communication, it gives such an amazing template, and I've actually started using it in my relationships at home and abroad. And I think this needs-based approach allows for, like, let's say I'm having a conversation with someone that I disagree with. I really listen to them, and then before I say anything that I believe in my opinion or my thought or reactive thinking of that's just not right, or I can't believe you think that, not that that's what you do, Dave, but I say, it sounds like this need may not be met. Does that feel right to you? Am I getting closer to it? So in my head, my intention going into this conversation is a quest to get at the heart behind what they're saying. Because a lot of us communicate, but we have a need behind that we're not getting at. And so to me, I have that imagery to just try to seek to understand, and that's the kind of deep listening where that's coming from. And it has been very helpful. And so I actually his great book, Nonviolent Communication, Marshall Rosenberg. We're doing the nonviolent communication trainings in Palmville, the incarceration facility, based on that book. It's incredible. I make it sound like it's the Bible, but but I did actually, not to go too further back, but I had an idea based on what you said, Bev, earlier. I thought it was really insightful, and I think you actually gave yourself an idea for a next project, just in your response. Because that question is, this is a little off topic, I'm sorry, but when you're standing outside with peace and people react in certain ways, and that's kind of a microcosm of maybe some larger issues of communication, what is peace to you is an incredible question. So it's like, I love just also putting up peace to kind of communicate what you believe, but what is peace to you could be a dialogue series that you put on social media. So what you do is you have a sign, instead of saying peace, you have a sign that says, what is peace to you? And maybe you have some kind of like tiny audio equipment, you don't even need it, probably just an iPhone. And anyone who's willing to come up and say, oh, I want to share what peace means to me, then you have a discussion, you record it, it's on social media. Bam, that's a way to get people involved and get people talking if you don't want it to book a space for it where you feel like that might be unsafe. Or you could do it as the next forum. So I love that this is called the Peace Forum. The next forum could be called What is Peace to You? Like Peace Forum 2.0. So I think I just really like that question because it invites people to think about their own definitions of peace, how they feel peace in their life, what they need in order to be more peaceful, and I think it can lead to some really good conversation. So I just wanted to work off of that.
Others? Oh, yes. We turn into pumpkins if we're not out of here by a quarter after. We will never be invited back. Okay.